Welcome to the Wheats on Your Mind podcast. My name is Aaron Harries. Wheats on Your Mind is brought to you by the Kansas Wheat Commission and Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. Our guest on this episode is Ken Rajas. Ken is a familiar voice to many as Director of Agriculture Programming at KBUF Radio. He is the president of Authentic Ag, an agriculture communication company. You might also see him on the Kansas Ag Report television show, which is broadcast across Kansas on Saturday mornings. But Ken is also a member of the Kansas House of Representatives, representing the 110th District in Northwest Kansas. He also currently serves as the chair of the House Ag Committee. And Ken, welcome. We're glad to have you on the podcast.
Well, Aaron, this is great to be a guest, and so I guess I get to answer the questions rather than to ask.
You are on the other side, my friend. The pressure is on. But I thought we would just talk about some issues today first. But Ken, just remind the listeners a little bit about yourself.
Well, sure, Aaron. And again, thanks for this opportunity. I am living on the farm I grew up on in central Kansas, north central Kansas, outside the community of Agra. It is near Phillipsburg in Phillips County. Grew up on a diversified operation where my brother-in-law is the main operator right now. We had the chance to move back not quite a decade ago, and that's kind of when our service started in the Kansas House of Representatives.
Your dad also has Doyle, who's passed on, was quite famous in agriculture too, wasn't he?
Well, my dad was president of the Kansas Farm Bureau in the mid-'80s to the mid-'90s, and still maintained the farming interest here. That's probably how all this started. I said I don't have a great story. It's all was pretty well growing up, but I was kind of a nerd. Where kids would like to go on vacation and do fun things. If I had my grades up and had my schoolwork done, I would be able to go along with my dad, and when he was the vice president of Farm Bureau when I was growing up, to go to Topeka or to go to Washington, D.C., and I would sit in the legislator's office and kind of learn about that. I was much more interested in policy and how those things got done than about anything else. The other things were fine, but it had a lot of conversations with him over the years, and of course some of the connections that were made and all that. So yes, so I would say our family has a long history of hopefully being good advocates for agriculture. I always say that if you can't farm, the next best thing is to talk about it, and I do that on a daily basis as well as a broadcaster all over the state of Kansas.
Well, he's certainly inspired you with those trips. I'm glad you got that inspiration there. You mentioned the wheat gluten plants at Phillipsburg, and there's of course one at Russell, and we talk a lot about those because they will have a significant local impact. I know between the two plants they'll use up to 30 million bushels of wheat. So what does it mean for your Agra area, the Phillipsburg area locally?
Well, I think what it does. It brings another part to the economy, the outlying, the other businesses, and support some of the local things we're trying to do here. One of the challenges right now is housing for some of these new workers. Really with the ethanol plant that's been here for about a decade or so, we did a lot of corn acres. And so I think you still have that transition. K-State Extension has been one that's been working along with Kansas Wheat, working with farmers to encourage them to go back to wheat acres and I know finding some higher protein varieties in this area, north central Kansas. We're excited kind of as we're talking, Aaron. Literally some of those test runs are being done. The plant in Phillipsburg and hopefully flour will be made in the coming days, and the process will begin. One of the things that we're trying to do is to help them also with some of the transportation issues and some of the things we advocated for a few years ago in the new transportation plan to help our short line railroads and some of these other agriculture interests. We hope that's going to happen. So we are excited and also looking forward to seeing how the plant in Phillipsburg, the plant in Russell, even in a sense, can almost work together. And if we can kind of be that hub, the central Kansas can kind of be the hub of wheat gluten, it is an exciting time, I believe.
Yeah, I think that competition for acres is going to be good to farmers and good for the local area. So it takes employees, people, and housing to run those facilities. How is Phillipsburg meeting those challenges?
Well, it's been a process, and working with our the Rural Housing Council in the state, some of our surrounding communities as well have received some grants, and so some dirt is turning, the infrastructure, and just trying to get those things lined up. It's happening. It's going to be a bit of a process, but some of those things have been secured in the south end of Phillipsburg to build some housing units, and I know there's other folks that are pretty aggressive about maybe even just doing some rehab right now, Aaron, just to make sure that people can get out. We do have a lot of campers around that for the construction workers, but also some of these workers. And the other thing that's happening while all this is going on, Aaron, while the plant is getting up and operational, we're having international visitors here, and they're training them on how things work. And I think from 4 or 5 different countries, I believe, that are in the area and learning, and so I think it's also good that they can see kind of the end process of construction and the beginnings. And we were able to take a tour, Aaron, and getting there a few weeks ago, and it's if you're not familiar with those, you get inside and it's just okay. Well, this is just like a lot of other flour mills that we've seen, and so that was kind of unique as well. And as far as that beginning of that process and how it all works, it is, I'm not a chemist, I'm not a scientist, but to me, it is fascinating and really looking forward to what this is going to mean, not only for the future of our community, wheat gluten, but also ethanol, and how we can do our small part in this area for renewable fuels.
Yeah, it's exciting. There are going to be a lot of eyes on north central and northwest Kansas the next few years in the wheat world. Well, let's have you put on your legislative hat. Again, you were chair of the Kansas House Ag and Natural Resources Committee. Let's look back first at the 2022 legislative session, at some of the key points out of that for wheat farmers.
Well, I think, the biggest thing that I still think that came out of the legislative session for agriculture did not happen in our committee. It happened in the Water Committee. They separated that out because leadership thought that was important, that it, given its own time. Representative Jim Minix from Scott City is the chair of that. He also sits on the Ag Committee, so we have a lot of conversations about that, and so I think that was probably the biggest thing. We worked on secure funding for the state water plan. Even though it would be nice to have the Agriculture Committee take credit for it, we walked hand in hand with them to make sure that irrigators and agriculture interests were very much a center of all this. Also, working with our groundwater management districts on some reporting situations and some things that probably will hopefully improve transparency and other things. And so that was probably one of the biggest things. Probably one of the biggest disappointments, Aaron, is we didn't get as much maybe tax relief as some of us wanted, and for the property tax or other taxes, we had a lot of different interests, and so hopefully things will get done this year. And I am probably a little different chairman than most. I am probably more of almost a reactionary than somebody that's going to go out and create a lot of different bills, a lot of different things to be overly proactive. If we need to, we will, but, kind of waiting to see what happens. And one of the things that we continued to talk about before the session, even a little bit into the session, was, what's going on the federal level with things like 30 by 30 that could really impact, where you can farm, what you can farm. And so that did not happen in the federal side. So that is one of the things. Aaron, hemp is one that we continue to discuss, and we will continue that on into the next year as well, of kind of where we are with that and how it affects wheat farmers. Is, to me, I think that's one that you can compete maybe with acres. And there are certain areas of the state that it works really well. Others may be a bit of a challenge, and we're still learning about that. So that, again, is another offer if a farmer wants to use that as part of their rotation. there's a lot of moving parts to that, and again, it goes back to one of the biggest moving parts is what's the federal government going to do about it. I think, a lot of times, Aaron, we have we do talk about the Farm Bill, and even though the state has nothing to do with the Farm Bill, it still impacts and things like how crop insurance and how those things affect Kansas farmers. We brought in some of those experts to talk to our committee, so we have a good understanding of that, and also the importance of just all the other industries. I think that's still part of it. In the House, we're up for election every other year, and so this coming year will be one. But we had a lot of new members, and so it's an education process. And much like we hear a lot on the federal level, is we have new members, so we want to make sure they have a good understanding instead of jumping right in to something without having kind of all the different facts. But the other thing, Aaron, we did spend probably more time than we have in quite a bit, is we talked a lot about soil health and why it's important, and some of the things that are going on, and maybe some of the practices that folks want to do, and what the state, what their role is in supporting conservation programs and the like.
Yeah, that is certainly, sustainability, regenerative ag, soil health are all key terms, and certainly from the perspective of wheat farmers, there are, I think, opportunities and challenges with that. You mentioned issues at the federal government that maybe the state legislature can't handle. So when you see something like the attempt to get rid of the stepped up basis at the federal level, what can you at the state level do if something like that were to happen?
Oh, well, I would say the biggest thing, the one thing that I've advocated for in my time in the legislature, is to keep use value at the top when it comes to agriculture land in Kansas. I think that's the one thing that we must continue to fight for, is that what that land produces, that's the level it should be, property tax levy should be at, rather than say like a house in an urban area. As far as to keep those taxes down, we're dealing with some things right now as well on some of the CRP ground from a federal Conservation Reserve program, if it's in the grassland program or not. As that program is over 30 years old now, and where are we at with taxes? So, we look at some of those things about stepped up basis on the federal level. Hopefully that won't happen, but that does get brought up a little bit from the state standpoint of everybody's always looking for more revenue, and luckily we still have some very strong agriculture minded legislators that even are on the tax committee. Our chair of the tax committee is from Wallace County, from Weston, and so, and as a working farmer, Adam Smith knows the importance of keeping agriculture land at tax at use value. And so we've been able to kind of stave off any sort of an effort. A few years ago, we had an urban legislator that really wanted to do that, and we got that to stop. And that's one thing that I always not really breathe a sigh of relief, but I'm always glad we get to the end of the session and that didn't gain any traction.
That's a great point. The Kansas legislature becomes more urbanized. You, as a rural representative, an agriculture representative, do you find yourself more on the defensive, or take the role of an educator for your urban partners?
Well, as I tell folks, you have to befriend our urban colleagues, and many times they ask questions, and so you talk about why it's important. A lot of times there's some kidding about, okay, so what are we doing? I have one legislator who says, okay, so what are we doing for your Kansas farmers today? And so, and we talk about it, and why even some of the things that are good for rural Kansas are also good for urban Kansas. And I have always said a strong rural Kansas means a strong Kansas. It's easy to get focused on all the bright, shiny things, say in Johnson County, and all the industrial things in Sedgwick County and some of our other 3 or 4 larger counties. But when you really get a chance to look even in rural Kansas some of our small businesses and some of these small manufacturers, the role they play. I always use an example. We have a couple of manufacturers in Norton, Kansas is in my district. And some of the things that they do are the micro pieces that go into the new Garmin aviation system. So I tell people, I said, the world doesn't fly without Norton, Kansas, and some of the things they do. And Norton is a small community in most people's minds. And so that's how we bridge the gap then with our Wichita area legislators. And I support a lot of the things in aviation because I believe it's good for the economy. And I think that's the thing where you have to come at it with a mindset of helping and to educate of why we really aren't too we're not too divided Kansas. I know a lot of times people want to bring that, but my agriculture committee is very diverse. I have a legislator that's literally like a mile from the Missouri border. I have one that's a pastor. I have one that is very much into environmental causes. I have one that is a very strong irrigator. I have several farmers. I have veterinarians. And so to try to keep everybody kind of in tune and I try to, and I don't limit questions. There is no bad question in the Ag Committee because I want people to know. I want people to understand and if they have any question, that and then if we don't have the right person, we'll bring the right person in to get those answers, because I think because we have such a diverse group in the Ag Committee, then that spills over into in a sense, the committee of the whole or all the legislature. So if we can come out, because the Ag Committee is one of the bigger committees, and so if we have a good understanding of those folks, they can talk to their neighbor on the floor, and then most of the time we're successful.
Well, that's a great behind the scenes perspective there, and do you think there is more that we as commodity groups, farmers, should be doing to assist in those efforts?
Well, I think anytime you have the opportunity to not only talk with an urban legislator, and I try to do that. Now I have my office by myself. I don't share an office, but when I did, folks from home would come. I would, there's so many Johnson County legislators. I was, in with them, and so I would introduce, say, somebody from home to them, and then I would miraculously have to go. I'll be back and leave those two by themselves to have that conversation. So I think that's it. But it also starts with we all have neighbors. Say relatives or friends we went to college with that live in these urban areas. And to talk about what goes on in rural Kansas, and then maybe they can share that with legislators. But anytime that get a chance to go to Topeka, it's a lot different than Washington. We're all kind of part-time legislators, and we all have other things to do. And so to get a chance to meet, and a lot of times urban legislators like to meet people from Western Kansas because it's there's a handful of us that talk a lot about rural Kansas, and sometimes they've heard it from us, but to hear it from somebody else, it kind of helps as well, and they go, oh, okay, well maybe y'all aren't as crazy as old Rogers, so maybe it's going to be okay.
Well, before we look forward here, I guess one issue I wanted to cover looking back is the legislature did get some financial assistance to the state universities, including Kansas State University, among other things, for the new Global Food Science Center here at K-State. How did that all come about?
Well, it was one that I think worked its way through the budget committee of agriculture, and then we, made sure as we were going through the appropriations process, the appropriations committee also sat on it. It was one that K-State really wanted. It was a priority, and so we wanted to make sure that in realizing the good work that K-State has done and will continue to do, and quite honestly, Aaron, I'll tell you, the excitement within the Capitol, as many parts of the state, with new President Richard Linton at K-State, it makes it something you want to fight for, and so it maybe wasn't quite as much as what some people wanted, but I think it was a good start, a good investment, and I think it's going to play well into kind of the reinvention or the relaunch of K-State.
Well, Ken, let's look forward to the 2023 legislative session. Seems like it's a long ways away, but it's going to come up here pretty quickly. So talk about a few of your priorities for the legislative session and some other issues that may come up.
Well, there'll probably be a number of things that will, as I said, water will be one that will be a top issue that will affect several folks. And so we'll kind of see what Representative Minix has in store. There's a little concern of maybe probably looking at things in right to farm. We're having some issues coming up right now as we see folks kind of wanting to do other businesses out in the countryside. And some folks maybe think, well, we are right to farm state, but are we? And so whose farm, and I've seen it nationally as well, where maybe some of the farming practices aren't as accepted as they will. And so I think one thing we want to make sure we reiterate that this is still a right to farm state and you have the ability to do that. Again, I think hemp, we're going to try to clean that up a little bit. What I mean by that is if there are regulations, if there are things that are hampering people that want to get into hemp production. And a lot of these things, I don't want to have a lot of time to reinvent the wheel on these things. The parties can get together and come up with something that they all kind of agree on. That is one. Foreign ownership of land. We did that last year, Aaron, a little bit. I'm thinking, we'll have a committee, an interim committee here before the session starts to go over kind of where we are with all that as far as, who should and shouldn't own land if you're a foreign national. So that will be something I'm sure will take some time in the session. We're continuing to work on things at Kansas State, as you said, some of the global things, but also one of the things last year that we worked a lot on was K-State 105, and that will continue as well. As looking at extension, looking at some other things, and that's one thing I like to bring in Dr. Featherstone to look at the economic situation of the state, and so our committee has a good idea there. Veterinary school is one that we'll continue to work with them to make sure that Kansas kids and K-State graduates have the opportunity to go to school at K-State. And again, that may be something that I don't know if that's the legislature's role or not, but there's some funding that comes, and so we just want to make sure that we continue that. The state fair just got completed after you and I talked, and there's some things that what can the legislature do to help them enhance agriculture, that experience. And we did some enhancements to help them with things like their sound system and lighting this year, and because that the state fair is still an agriculture based, we want to make sure that stays there as well. Renewable fuels is one that there's a lot of federal things that go through that, but we see where soybeans are, and in the future soy biodiesel and situations like that. The veterinarians and pet animals, those are always issues that get brought up, and I'm sure there'll be a few others. Probably some things like I'm not thinking of as well. There's usually a long list, and a lot of times as I'm going somewhere to speak, I'll get my little pad out, start writing things down, and all of a sudden there's a number of issues. But I think in spilling over, I think you'll see taxes do a lot. But as I mentioned earlier, Aaron, it's an election year after the session, and so all the House, all the Senate will be up, and so you have some House members running for Senate and so on. And so, as I've said at other forums, contact your legislator. Hopefully you have a relationship with them and call them or message them and say, okay, what's really going on? Because a lot of times the headline may not be exactly what's going on, or you say, well, I'm hearing this might happen. Well, maybe it's not. And so that's those are some of the things to think about. The other thing, Aaron, is this situation with Quivira. That's really a federal issue. There's not much the state can do. I know the governor's got involved in it, but anytime you have water issues, those of us in agriculture are always a little concerned because of people that don't understand how agriculture has water rights and the water situation to grow crops and grow food, that they think, well, it's there's some simple answers. Well, there really isn't. And so that's where we're luckily that we can have open conversations, but also we work with our municipalities and others because we just got out of a drought. And so we didn't maybe use quite as much water in the south and west because of those rains we received kind of after the session. We weren't sure. I think when the session got over, I think we had 3, maybe 4 inches of moisture. And then like that, the middle of August, we were at 17, which we normally are here at the farm. So that is a key issue to keep the economy going.
Yeah, a lot of activity there. You think the water issue is going to be very contentious in the session this year, or is it working its way through calmly?
Well, I think you're probably going to have some folks that will get a little excited, but I hope that cooler heads prevail, and I've said that I hope we take a measured process, that we don't overreact on any level, that, okay, here we are, and so how do we move forward? And so whether that would be making some investments in some of the water-saving tools, and instead of just saying, well, we're going to cut your irrigation off by X, or and that. So I hope that we don't do some drastic things, that we do take a measured approach, that we do have conversations, and I think we will. And I think that we get an opportunity to talk about how other states and other things have done. But I think, again, it goes back to should be local control, those local groundwater management districts. Those are elected boards of local individuals, and those decisions should be made. We don't want Topeka. We don't want Topeka to get in the middle of things like that. It should be better by self-governance. Now, if it doesn't, then that's where you get other people involved. And so, yeah, I probably think a little different than some, but I still think that those GMDs, those are the farmers, those are the water users are affected, and they should be the ones that make the call. And because again, that's a livelihood of so many communities, and that's why there's a concern about what's going on in central Kansas with Quivira. If all of a sudden, all those junior water rights go away, irrigation stops. Senator Miranda said that could cost $1 billion of economic activity. That is a terrible thing for the economy of Kansas.
Yeah, well, you're going to have an interesting few months in this session, I can tell. Speaking of the Kansas economy, I guess the last question here for you, Ken. You've got your pulse on the finger of the rural economy, the agriculture economy in western central Kansas. It's been a couple of tough years for rural Kansas, I think. How do you think the state is positioned to move forward the next couple of years, even if we might be looking at a national recession?
I will tell you, after COVID and during COVID, the Kansas people spent money. Tax receipts came in. We did something right before COVID, not because of it, just trying to fill in the gap on sales tax collections on some of our online shopping. That we were collecting a lot from the bigger retailers, or your Walmarts, your Best Buys, and so on, but sometimes say with an Amazon as well, those that had a Kansas nexus, but a place here in Kansas. But Amazon was a good example. They also have people that do business with them. You can maybe go to Amazon buy, but it wasn't necessarily an Amazon product, and so we weren't collecting that sales tax. So, Aaron, to get to that, to make a long story short, is that revenue come in much stronger than many of us anticipated. And so we left the session with nearly a $3 billion surplus. So we put well over $1 billion in the rainy day fund, which is, again, like you talked about, if we do have a recession, which a lot of folks are thinking the national recession will come in the fourth quarter. If it does, that would probably be delayed here in Kansas. Right now, we're in pretty good shape when it comes to the money we've saved. Now, but I also believe some of that should go back in the form of tax relief. So, all that being said, the Kansas economy will go, A, as agriculture goes, as commodity prices are, and B, if we can sell airplanes. And we know that Spirit's going through some challenges right now, so we do have some pretty tough headwinds, I would say, moving forward. But I am an optimist. I believe that Kansas' best days are ahead of her. I truly do. I mean, it's a cyclical thing, but when I got in the legislature, the state had no money. And sometimes that makes it even a better legislature, Aaron, when we don't have a lot of things that we have to make those tough choices to know what investments to do. But overall, I'm cautiously optimistic, let's put it that way, but I am bullish on the long-term future of Kansas.
Well, I appreciate your perspective. I personally pray and hope that farmers have a better crop production year next year, and I think that will happen. So, well, Ken, I appreciate you joining us. It's great to hear from you always, and for giving us that update. And we'll probably have you back on again sometime when or after the session is done.
All right, Aaron. Well, we appreciate it as always. Continue to pray for rain.
All right. Thank you, Ken. My thanks to Ken Rogers for joining us on Wheats on Your Mind. Wheats on Your Mind is brought to you by the Kansas Wheat Commission and Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. If you have a topic you'd like us to cover in the future or have a question for one of our guests, please email us at podcast@kswheat.com. I'm Aaron Harries. Thanks for listening.